interesting things. And I went to see the publishers, and I met the lady, and she had received a number of drawings. Now, this lady was, I won't say illiterate, but she certainly was not a good writer, right? Mm. She hadn't done more than the basic minimum schooling and then gone to work in a factory. So she wasn't someone who was highly educated. But she claimed that she was in touch with aliens, right? Mm-hmm. And there's another subject to flag. Again, I'm not someone that goes around saying, I see aliens, or, wonderful flying saucers, they're going to come down here and rescue us. I have an open mind on the subject. I mean, I'm quite convinced that there are other places which are inhabited in the universe, because it would be very strange and odd if this one insignificant planet going around a star on the edge of the Milky Way was the only place that's inhabited. Yeah. When you've got more stars in the sky than there are grains of sand on the Earth, Yeah. To put it in context. If you went to all the beaches on the Earth and you took all the grains of sand, there's still not enough there to match the number of stars that there are in the universe. Yeah. So it'd be kind of stupid to think that this is the only place where there's any kind of life. Yep. Whether they're able to communicate with us and come here, that's another subject.
That's right. That's right. But again, I'm much the same way, Adrian. It's just about, we can't know either way, so why dismiss it? Or even, if we don't know, why prop it up? We need to have balance about these things,
Yeah, and our science, we vaunt ourselves about it. It's only about 400 years old.
That's right, yeah.
You could say, roughly speaking, the time of Galileo marks the beginning of modern science. Yeah, okay, we've got stuff which came from a bit earlier, but people weren't making any progress really, and then this will tie in with what I'm going to be talking about with the Invisible College. But people weren't making any progress. The idea of progress didn't really occur until around about 1600. A little bit before that maybe, but basically the ideas before that was that you preserve the knowledge of the past and you discuss it. Yeah. So you study Aristotle because Aristotle is a genius, and you interpret what he's written. You maybe look a bit at Plato and you study Plato because he's also a genius, but you don't question what these great masters have discovered or said. Yeah, their words are set in stone.
Yeah, right.
So you can interpret, but only within that field. It was only around about 1600 that people began to throw off those shackles and say, look, we must find new knowledge. We must break out of this egg. We've got to go on, and there is more knowledge to be discovered, and it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll talk about that a bit later.
Adrian, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but I think we also need to begin to run things up here for the first hour. And what I want to do is I want to spend just a little bit of time, about 8 minutes to 10 minutes on talking about two different things. I first of all, in this first hour, want you to mention the Invisible College as a briefly what it is for people who want to check it out, where they are going to go and so forth. And then in the last 5 or 4 minutes, we can also talk a little bit about your upcoming appearance at the AV2 conference. Then we can run things up and continue talking more about this fascinating area. But so tell us a little bit about the Invisible College and then a little bit about the conference, okay?
Right, okay.
Yes.
Now, around about 1610, or 1614, a bunch of pamphlets started appearing in Europe, supposedly written by followers of someone called Christian Rosenkreuz.
Yeah.
As we would say, Christian Red Cross.
Rosicrucians.
Rosicrucians, yeah. And that's nothing to do with these people you see advertising in magazines today, saying, write in and you can have a correspondence course, make you illuminated. Nothing to do with that. This was actually around 1614. These pamphlets started appearing in Europe, but they were actually written a little bit earlier than that. And the Rosicrucians claimed that their leader, Christian Rosenkreuz, was a real man who had lived about 150 years earlier and had journeyed to the east and had originally been going to Jerusalem, but he ended up in Damascus, and he was initiated by the local Arabs there into their knowledge, particularly about healing and the use of herbs and so forth. And and then he traveled elsewhere in the Islamic world. And then he came back to Europe thinking that he was, they'd be delighted to have this new knowledge, that he would go to the universities and tell the professors about this new knowledge, or I suppose it was old knowledge that he was bringing back. And they'd all want to learn and know about this. And of course, it's not like that at all. They didn't want to hear about it. They, as we were discussing earlier, they were quite happy with the situation where they're discussing Aristotle. They didn't want to hear anything else.
Right.
So then he went off and he founded a little group of his own with 8 followers, and he would teach them. And then each time one of them would die, someone else would take his place. So there's kind of a small group. And their idea was they were going to discover new knowledge. And basically they were following what was then called natural philosophy. We would now call science.
Yeah.
That this would be the way forwards, and it would heal the great rift, the religious rifts that were appearing, in the 16th and 17th century. The tremendous problems about religion in Europe, which led to the 30 Years' War a little bit later.
Right.
Anyway, so these pamphlets were published, and they announced that people could come and join this group, and they would be taught the way. And that produced 2 responses. The first response was people saying, "Where can I join? I want to be part of this. Yeah, I've been waiting for this all my life. I really, really want to join." And the other response is, "Where are these people so we can chop their heads off?"
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So they were very wisely kept their heads down. And then the idea went around that this was really all just a hoax. It was just a joke. There's nothing really behind this. It's all nonsense.
You're saying that they had to be secret in order to even be able to exist at all, right?
Yeah. And if anyone did join, they did so secretly. We haven't got time to go into the whole business of the Rosicrucian furore. I have written a bit about this in one of my books called The New Jerusalem.
Okay.
Anyway, in 1642 in London, a group of eminent gentlemen, people like Sir Christopher Wren, Reverend Wilkins, Robert Boyle, various other people that were scientists, as we would now call them, got together and started meeting privately in Gresham College, which was a special institution in London where it was set up as a benefactory towards the people of London, where it's kind of a free school. They would teach people, give people lectures, the ordinary people, teach them mathematics and music and things like this. Anyway, they started meeting together there, and then later they moved to Oxford. And you've got to understand, this is the time of the English Civil War, when the Roundheads and the Cavaliers are fighting. In Europe, you've still got the 30 Years' War going on. And it's a very tense time between Protestants and Catholics and Royalists and Roundheads, and they made a pact, and they said, we won't discuss any of that. We'll leave politics outside the door. We'll leave religion outside the door. We're going to focus on making finding new knowledge, new science. Now, that group were called the Invisible College, and that later, after the restoration of King Charles II, they became the Royal Society of London, which is still the most eminent scientific body in the world. Had a royal charter, and Charles II himself was its patron. But something was lost in the translation, because the Invisible College, they weren't only following science, they were also investigating the Bible, they were investigating religion. They believed that there were 2 books of God. There's the written text, the scriptures, handed down, divinely revealed, however you want to call it. And then there was the book of nature. So you had to read the 2 books together. Science studies the book of nature, but you also study the book of knowledge, the Bible.
Right.
So that's why people like Isaac Newton were doing the 2 things. So they were investigating nature, but they were also very religious, investigating the Bible, trying to understand about prophecy and so forth.
Okay, yeah.
And very much what they were doing was they were rebalancing the situation away from religion towards practicality and knowledge, and extending knowledge and science and logic. But unfortunately, that pendulum has swung now too far the other way. Yeah.
Yes.
We're now in a situation where people deny the world of spirit. They deny that there's anything worth looking at in the Bible, for instance, or in religion. Certainly, the orthodoxy do. Religion has become kind of a peripheral thing where just a few old people go along to church and, pray to some invisible God who probably doesn't exist. That's the attitude, right? Well, my feeling is that we need another reformation of this. We need to rebalance again, but this time we need to bring back that spiritual element into what we're investigating.
Into the scientific field.
Into the scientific field. So that's why I've started the Invisible College. But this time, you see, they called it invisible because a lot of their stuff was done by letter. They would, they didn't always meet up together, but they would write to each other.
It's not a physical place where people went to attend and so forth.
They did attend, in London and in Oxford.
Right.
I think mostly in Oxford, actually. But there were European members and people, who couldn't easily get to see what the latest experiments were or whatever. So they wrote papers and they circulated these papers and letters between themselves. Kind of snail mail version of the internet.
Right, there you go. Exactly.
So I sort of felt that it's time that we did something similar and try and draw together people that share a common interest in this rebalancing in preparation for what I believe is major changes that are coming in our time. And their work gave birth to what we call the Enlightenment. Yeah. But it's no longer very enlightened.
Exactly.
It's become very dark.
Yeah.
So we need kind of a new instauration, as a word that Sir Francis Bacon used a lot, this kind of idea of renovation, taking something and making it new again. We need to do that again in our time, and we need to question everything. We can't just sit back and say, well, we've sorted out the problems. We know, now we know how the sun works, we know how the planets work, we know everything. Yeah. That to me is a very arrogant, stupid attitude to take.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I don't know how much science you've done, but when I went to school, we did science. We were taught about atoms and molecules and electrons going around in orbits. And as soon as I went to university, I discovered actually that model is not right. Everything was then wave theory and the shapes of orbitals and completely different. You had to unlearn everything you had learnt before.
Exactly.
And start again.
Yeah.
So why do we think the models that we have now are fixed? They're not. They're going to change, and we're going to discover that we're as ignorant as people were in the Middle Ages.
Right.
So it's not quite,
So it's about not about also, shattering all the old, but taking from that what is good and utilizing that knowledge, but then continuing to build and evolve. Because again, the scientific field is making a lot of progress in that sense. A lot of things are being drawn to the table. That people can look at, and especially over the web now, one person can read a report about a scientific discovery and have a totally different other interpretation of what they've found than another guy, and that is what's so interesting here.
Yes, that's right. But the problem that we have is everything's becoming so lost in the detail.
That's right.
Scientists become specialists in very, very narrow fields, and so they assume everybody else understands their field, other fields that is. So they concentrate on their own, and they assume that what they read in books that other people have written at a general level must be right.
Yeah, there you go. But
nobody's taking the broad view and seeing the whole picture, because that's not what they're taught. And that's not where you're going to get funding for research. You're not funded to be a Renaissance man.
Exactly, yeah.
No one will pay your bills for that. If you're rich enough, you can be a Renaissance man if you like.
Well, I think it has to also come from a passion in a sense as well. I mean, this isn't people who are going to live off of tenure, if you will. This has to be a driving force from within the person who is engaged in this type of work as well. Obviously, economics and economic help is always needed and must be